So it's my great pleasure again to introduce Professor Annelies Wilder-Smith on addressing COVID vaccine hesitancy. Annelies is Professor of Emerging Infectious Diseases at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She also currently serves as a consultant to the WHO, World Health Organization, where she is the focal point for the SAGE deliberations on COVID-19 vaccinations. She specializes in emerging viral diseases such as Zika, dengue, chikungunya, yellow fever, SARS, influenza, and now, of course, COVID. And in 2003, she was at the forefront of the SARS outbreak in Singapore. With a career spanning almost 3 decades, she's led and co-led various clinical trials, published more than 350 scientific papers, edited and co-edited textbooks and travel magazine books, served on various editorial boards and scientific committees, including being an editorial consultant to The Lancet magazine. She's the principal investigator of an EU-funded international consortium called Zika Plan, and she recently completed another 4-year research project on dengue, also funded by the European Commission. But today's topic is vaccine hesitancy and conspiracy theories. So over to you, Annelies.
So thank you for the opportunity to being with you again today. Vaccine hesitancy and conspiracy theories are obviously emotionally laden and also politically laden topics. In the field of vaccinology, vaccine hesitancy and conspiracies are not new topics. They are as old as vaccines. However, during our current ongoing pandemic, social media have magnified these issues to a historic record that we have never witnessed before. All of us will have received WhatsApp messages, Twitter, Facebook, email messages about COVID-19 related conspiracy theories. We are really in this mess together. And I personally have often been very pained by all these sometimes real rubbish coming out. So let us just be reminded about the global situation as of 14 June. 170 million confirmed cases, and sadly, we are now nearing the 4 million mark of global deaths, and this is an underestimate. COVID-19 is the biggest health crisis of our generation, in fact, the worst pandemic in the past 100 years, only to be beaten by the influenza vaccine, by the influenza pandemic from 1918, so that's about 103 years ago. If you just look at the past 1 week, 2.6 million new cases, 72,000 deaths. We have all become numb to the numbers. When it started in January, February last year, I was still pained by every single death, and now we have become numb. In the US, the death toll has now reached 600,000, thereby making COVID the 3rd leading cause of death in that country. During the height of the pandemic in the US, it was even the leading cause, the first cause, with more than 4,000 deaths per day. So exceeding even the deaths due to cardiovascular causes. To suppress the magnitude of the pandemic, we had to apply socioeconomically painful public health and social measures. And the crisis is therefore not only a health crisis, but also a socio-economic crisis, and therefore politics is so entangled. But the only answer to this crisis, be it health or socio-economic, is a scientifically sound technological solution, and the best technological solution is vaccination. So you'll be reminded the SARS-CoV-2 virus is studied, with these spike proteins, and they are the enablers for the virus to enter cells. So therefore, the spike protein became the initial target for vaccine development. And so if you block entry, you block disease. And this turned out, fortunately for us, to be the right decision. Another issue that was discussed before we had all the vaccines that came out was the minimum vaccine efficacy that we wanted to see. And the target product profile specifies a minimum of 50%. We would have accepted a vaccine that can reduce 50% of disease. Even if we have now 4 million, instead of 4 million, 2 million, it would be a major public health victory. But we were all positively surprised by the good results, which were far better than we anticipated. 9 November 2020, 9 November is my birthday, that's why I will never forget it. The results came out from the first vaccine, the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, showing 95% efficacy. We celebrated. And also, meanwhile, 6 other vaccines have achieved WHO emergency use listing. 2 of those are an mRNA vaccine, 2 are inactivated, that's a Sinopharm and Sinovac, and 2 are adenovector viral vaccines, and these are the Chadox, so that's the AstraZeneca vaccine, and the Johnson vaccine. Many other vaccines are coming out, are about to come out, for use, like Novavax, Bharat, Gamaleya, some of them already being used in many of these countries. But all these vaccines that we are currently using or looking at all have vaccine efficacies above 50%. Efficacy may differ from phase 3 results or from vaccine to vaccine, but it's also because the phase 3 trials use different clinical endpoints and different case definitions. So you cannot, and it's a very important message, you cannot directly compare the efficacies between vaccines. You cannot therefore do ranking. And if you look at the, I don't think I can point it out, but here the efficacy against death or hospitalizations or severe disease in the trials were for all vaccines, close to 100%. The caveat was, though, in the phase 3 trials that the numbers were small and therefore you did not always have a statistically significance. However, now that we have vaccines rolled out massively, we now have additional data from what we call post-introduction vaccine effectiveness studies. And again, reassuringly, you can see that the efficacy, and here in post-introduction, I usually look at hospitalizations, that they're all very high. And so the AstraZeneca, although initially looked lower than for the Pfizer vaccine, if you look at the vaccine effectiveness studies against hospitalization, severe disease, indeed, they're all reassuringly very high, above 90%. So there are many now post-introduction vaccine effectiveness studies. I have pulled out one because I think this is such exciting news. This is Israel, the data from Israel. And as you know, Israel was really the first country to rapidly introduce the vaccine, rapidly have very high vaccine coverage rates, and it's a model country for us to follow. So you can see here the curve with increasing vaccine coverage. They peaked and then declined to close to zero, despite incremental opening of all the restrictions. So this is the hope that we have. If Israel can do it, we can also do it. But we now have an additional problem, and that is that we have increasingly variants of concerns. And variants of concerns occur where you have a high amount of circulating viruses in a background of low vaccine coverage. I've only pulled out here Janssen, I could have pulled out anyone, but I think the most important message here is, yes, it is reduced, but it's not zero. It's not like with influenza where you have on and off, it's really just reduced. But, and I think this is also an important message for all of us, is that the effectiveness against severe disease remains relatively high. So although we are concerned about the variants of concerns, overall, the vaccine effectiveness also lowered. It's not markedly lowered. But there could be more variants of concerns and we need to keep track. Here, I've just pulled the data from the global vaccine tracker, so you get a feel of how many COVID-19 vaccine doses have been administered globally. And it's now more than 2.4 billion doses. This is an amazing achievement. The first vaccine's result only came out in November. It was really, we received emergency use listing only by the end of December. And now we are here 6 months later and 2 billion doses. That's a historic record. And about 9.7% of the global population is now fully vaccinated. This is still far too low. And we also have to highlight there is an incredible inequitable distribution, with some countries having far higher than 50% coverage and some as low as still only 1%. So this is our imperative, more imperative, to ensure better equity. But I'm also showing these numbers for another reason. No one can now say that we don't have experience with the COVID-19 vaccines. With 2 billion doses, we have good data. And there's something else before I move to the good and bad and ugly of vaccine hesitancy. I'm very happy to first focus on the good. And the good is in this map. You see here, the global vaccine acceptance is actually quite high, with around 70% globally. The acceptance, if you look at data that were obtained about a year ago, the acceptance has gone really up from initially 30–40% to now 70%. This is good news. There is a distribution. So for example, a really low acceptance here is in Russia. And very high is in fact in Latin America and parts of Asia. The US and France, interestingly, France has a history of also relatively poor acceptance, have a little bit lower acceptance compared to, for example, Canada, most of Latin America, many European countries. The UK. The UK, for example, has done very well in their communication, involved the Queen, the Princess, the music, stars, etc. So this is the good news. But now let's move into what has led to conspiracy theories and to lower acceptance. Let's define first. So rumor is unverified information, usually stories, anecdotes, can be true or false. Misinformation is accidental falsehoods. So it's wrong or misleading information with the power to dilute, distract, or distort truth or facts. Disinformation is deliberate, intentional, engineered falsehood circulated with malicious intent or for the purpose of serving a personal, political, or economic agenda. So now let's focus more on the disinformation or misinformation side. So why are we all susceptible to misinformation? We are vulnerable. This is times of very complex issues. I need to change something here. Of uncertainty to a whole mix of social, cognitive, etc. biases. There is in many countries a lower trust in science and scientists, or in the mainstream, or in governments, or in any authorities. And this is linked to higher susceptibility to misinformation. But also we live, in a time where the complexity of our lives are so difficult that sometimes the conspiracies may reduce it to a simplicity to explain what is happening. And this is in the background of maybe of powerlessness and mistrust. Then we are obviously all exposed to misinformation through the increasing social media and voice opinions that just come up like here and there, and more through other online social networks, which fuel this, what we call the infodemic. And often such, conspiracy theories are much more interesting. They're attention grabbing. And so the social media, they know how to incentivize the circulation of misinformation and disinformation. And it always spreads faster and further than true information. 3 reasons why people proactively, sometimes maliciously, create vaccine disinformation. And these 3 reasons are to monetize, to make money out of this, to polarize, to intentionally cause social disruption, and to politicize. Let's go into this. So how does someone who really wants to, how can you actually gain financial or political gain from such rubbish? There are many, many reasons, and we need to understand this behind all this. So because it's attention grabbing, this information, it draws people into certain websites or social media accounts and to view contents as videos. And often each of those sites hosts an advertisement. So if you click, it creates revenue for the owner of that website and the content on it. So regardless, so it's a way of attracting people. Even if you don't believe in the misinformation, so it helps you make money. So people, organizations hoping to sell products, they want to sell products and they know, oh, everyone's reading, about the vaccine. So they pull the vaccine information only to sell the products. There's a lot of weaponized health information that also disseminated by state actors, even governments using bots and trolls in an attempt to promote social discord and polarization. This is a German, this is in German, but what I want to say here, that there are PR agencies that look for influencers, and influencers are social media influencers who have followers of like 1 million people. And they offer them money and say, well, if you add a little bit of vaccine disinformation, conspiracy, we'll give you more money. So this is the background to it. Plus anti-vaccination actors, and there are actually not that many. There are really 15 who are the most vocal and strategically well-versed. They have a strategy. They are clever. They are smart. They know how to reach, and they know how to reach the undecided, because their content is often more persuasive than our so-called scientific content. So on Facebook, anti-vaccine pages are heavily entangled with undecided users, while pro-science sites are talking to the already converted. There are 10 websites, actually not so many, who really have a follower that is so many more times than so-called established health sites like WHO, CDC, other health sites. Plus, the anti-vaccine messages are stickier. They stick in your memory much better than pro-vaccine messages. They use persuasive techniques. They're emotionally more resonant, salient, often use visuals, and are very good in their communication. Plus, these anti-vaccine entrepreneurs, they are entrepreneurs. They're there for financial gain. They connect with each other and mobilize others to increase their reach. And third, so we had monetized, we had polarized, but it's also politicization of vaccines. And the best example here is that the blue states have a higher vaccine coverage rates in the US compared to the red states. And so it means that the whole vaccine ideas and worldview is entangled with a much bigger worldview. And although we must say, although the Trump promoters or supporters have a lower vaccine coverage rates, Trump, if you like him or not, but he really is pro-vaccine. He spent a lot of money to speed up vaccine development in the US. So you see, it's a very complex issue here. But what really disturbs me personally most is the conspiracy that is now related to vaccines, to religious leaders. And I will now show you a few slides. So in India, this man suggests that the vaccine is an international conspiracy to feed cows blood. I can honestly tell you there is no cow's blood in the vaccines. Here's a Jewish Orthodox leader who says, oh, well, vaccines cause homosexuality. How would a spike protein-based vaccine cause homosexuality? This one says it could control our minds. This one says it could result in a final enslavement. Some people say that the vaccine will make their children sterile. This is particularly with the polio vaccines, and this is there's a long-standing history, especially in Nigeria, where it really hampered the polio, eradication endgame. And so the sterility issues or infertility issues came back with the COVID vaccine. Here, a Greek Orthodox bishop says slaughtered fetuses are used to make vaccine. And then also the Christians. Here, a bishop tells Christians not to take the COVID-19 vaccine. They go out on the streets and say not to take. It's an insult to the church. Well, and a lot of pastors or a lot of Christians, unfortunately Christians too, they say this whole pandemic is a hoax. If you have a fake pandemic, why do you need a vaccine? Here is a picture actually of one congregation, and I do not want to add the name, and I've therefore taken it out. And so this pastor has quadrupled his congregation, which also means financial gain, by saying, don't take the vaccine. I listened to one of his sermons. I could not find a compassionate Jesus in that sermon. It was all about the vaccine. Here, Christians say they, that means probably the governments, or who, I don't know, they want to alter us. It's America's wicked plan, know your enemy. It's a wicked plan to give us vaccines. And here the words, vaccine is the mark of the beast. And so it says it's a sign of the devil and sign of the end times. Do not get vaccinated. Christians. And then we have the whole QAnon. And QAnon always plays around the word truth. Everywhere you will say, you know, Q and truth comes together. So QAnon, as you know, is a loosely connected network of online commentators. It's really birthed, unfortunately, also in evangelical fundamentalism and Republican extremism. Although they do not have a recognizable institutional framework and they're a mixture of a lot of worldviews, but unfortunately, they have become very strong and have used the pandemic to really become a force. It is more, unfortunately, than a conspiracy theory. It's also more than a fringe political movement. It has all the hallmarks of a new religious movement. It's an apocalyptic cult. It uses satanic rhetoric. It demonizes. It's the narrative of good and bad. If you get vaccinated or if you believe in a pandemic, you are demonized, you are bad. And unfortunately, although it's mainly an online network, the online conspiracy theories had an offline effect. And as you know, the storm on the US Capitol was partially also driven, or maybe mainly, by QAnon followers. So this is depressing, and we need to have a response, and the response must be facts-driven. So how do we respond? It's facts, it's the warning, it's highlighting the fallacy and coming up again with facts. It's so very important to remain relevant, but also have stickier, learn from them, have a stickier message, but also looking into the tactics that these people use and why they use it, and what is the hidden agenda, politicizing, social disruption, etc., and really making sure that people understand those tactics, and then provide alternative, correct info that must be well communicated. Don't leave a vacuum. We have to fill the vacuum, and that's our duty as Christians. I will now go into just a few selected conspiracy theories and rumors, and happy when you have questions to go in more. But I have selected three. So one, mRNA vaccines genetically modify humans. Microchips are included for global tracking. COVID-19 vaccines cause infertility. So let's start with the first one. Can mRNA genetically modify humans? It is actually understandable that the word alone, mRNA, may trigger connotations about genetic manipulations. So that's unfortunately, but you and me, we are doctors, we are scientists, and I will now just look at the science. The mRNA vaccine is the vector to encode for the spike protein. There's no other genetic material. It is the spike protein alone that it then delivers into the cells for the cells to produce the spike protein. Unfortunately, the mRNA in itself is very short-lived. It is degraded within seconds or minutes. And so you can see in this, I don't know whether you actually can see my pointer, but so the naked mRNA in itself will be degraded by the lysosomes. So you have to protect it with lipid nanoparticles. So the delivery vehicle are these lipid nanoparticles. Lipid nanoparticles are spherical vesicles made up of lipids. So they like cholesterol, like polyethylene glycol. They are positively charged. And I forgot to say the mRNA are huge molecules and negatively charged. So basically they form a complex, and this ensures that its construct actually can enter the cell, is not immediately degraded, and has time enough to enter the intracellular, so the endothelium and the ribosomes, where then it will be, it triggers and it's converted into triggering a genetic code and the sequences of this spike protein. And the spike protein is then released, secreted, and that then triggers the immune response. So now here comes the microchip theory. So Bill Gates' microchip conspiracy fast-checked. It claims that the coronavirus pandemic is a cover for a plan to implant trackable microchips, and that Bill Gates is behind it. In fact, in one poll of 1,600 people, 28% of Americans believe indeed that Bill Gates wants to use vaccines to implant microchips in people, and this was higher in Republicans. What is the background to this? Well, unfortunately, lipid, the word again, nanoparticle, reminds us of nanotechnology, which is probably used in microchips, but here it is about lipid nanoparticles who are just lipids. And they are meant to serve as a vehicle, as I said, for nucleic acids cell entry, so that's the mRNA cell entry, to stabilize the mRNA and to protect it against rapid degradation. So they're really like cholesterols to fill and promote the cell bindings, nothing else. They are liquid, they fit into a needle, they're not microchips. So, but we have to come up with stickier messages. The science alone does not help because you're still a scientific audience. Let me just repeat. mRNA has the code for the spike protein, not none of other genetic material. mRNA is actually degraded within minutes, and that is why it needs to be coupled with lipid nanoparticles. Lipid nanoparticles are not microchips, they are lipids, cholesterol, polyethylene glycol, and they help then enter. The spike proteins are then produced within the endoplasmic reticulum, and then the spike protein is then secreted into the system to trigger the antibody response, whilst the mRNA is by that time already degraded. The mRNA does not enter the nucleus. It cannot intercalate with the DNA. So much to the science. Another question, is it true? Do COVID-19 vaccines cause infertility? The claim is that spike protein is identical with syncytin-1, which is some part of the placenta. The fact is, they are not. They are not identical. Unfortunately, this claim came out just at a time when they were filing to the European Medicine Agency for corona vaccine, for the mRNA vaccines, and caused a lot of fear. And it's still circulating, especially in Asia and in Africa, especially, in fact, amongst the Muslim world. So when you receive, like I do on a daily basis, I do unfortunately receive another WhatsApp message, or you respond. Did you hear about it? So when there's something about something, and it always is terrible, and your immediate reaction is, this is outrageous, I need to share with someone else, I click and forward it. But wait and see. Ask the person to send the link. Where's the origin? What is the source? Are there any other comments? Check on it. And then see what others say. And often you can then stop this malicious chain of sending and forwarding all these terrible WhatsApp messages. What is our Christian response? We as Christians need to speak up against conspiracy theories, against QAnon, against dis and misinformation, and against myths. We need to rebuild trust in science and in technological solutions. we need to counter vaccine hesitancy, because the only response really to this pandemic, the solution is high vaccine coverage rates. Dispel vaccine myths and communicate that vaccines are a gift from God, one of many tools given to us to relieve suffering in this world. And 4 million deaths is a sign of suffering. How do we show Christian compassion? By loving our neighbor, by protecting the vulnerable, and by caring for those disproportionately affected by the pandemic response. How do we do this? Not by politicizing. It's by giving up our usual privileges and stay at home, physical distancing. We're wearing these masks. They don't hurt. They have nothing to do with Holocaust, all that stuff. And by getting vaccinated yourself. If you think you have a low risk of severe disease outcomes, then get vaccinated, not for yourself, but to protect others. And then a lot of practical help is still needed, for a lot of people have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic response of social distancing, and there's a lot of injustice done. My last slide. No one is safe until everyone is safe. We need a global response to COVID-19, which means equitable vaccine distribution. It's not only humanitarian imperative, it is a moral imperative. It's our choice how we react to this pandemic. Will it result in greater justice, abundance, and dignity? Or will it result in more conflict, in social disruption, in insecurity and poverty? We have to act now, and we have to act together. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Annelies. We've been listening to Professor Annelies Wilder-Smith speaking to us on addressing COVID vaccine hesitancy. And wow, you've got a talk that is absolutely thoroughly up to date with a lot of things you won't hear elsewhere. And I suspect that a lot of the questions people have come along with have been answered already in the talk, but we've got a time for Q&A now. So let's then go to the questions. And the first one here from Marcus Hell, who's asking the big question. We were talking about this a bit before we came on air, Professor. Do you think we should vaccinate children under 12 years with the available vaccine? What's the current guidance, given the very low risk from the disease itself, but the importance also of herd immunity and protecting others?
Yes, indeed, it's currently a hot topic also at WHO, because Pfizer was the first now to reduce the age down to 12, but we don't have vaccines below the age of 12 at this stage. So indeed, as you said, children have a very low risk of severe disease, hospitalizations, and death. Younger children, so up to the age of 12, also really do not contribute much to transmission. Adolescents from the age of 12 and young adults do contribute to transmission. So there may be a transmission argument. However, the current stance that we have at WHO after hours of discussions is that, first of all, we need to ensure that there's high coverage in the truly high-risk population, so that all age groups above 30 are definitely have achieved very high coverage rates. And actually hardly any country has really done so, except maybe 3 or 4 countries. And we also at WHO say that countries that have achieved high coverage rates in adults and high-risk populations and now still have enough vaccines, they should consider donating those vaccines to other countries first, before even thinking of going down below the age of 18.
Okay, thanks very much. Is it, from Sherry Falkenheimer here, is it true that aborted fetal tissue is used in production of some vaccines, for example, Johnson & Johnson, and to what degree?
So no vaccine, no COVID-19 vaccine contains any aborted fetal cells. However, for the adenoviral vector vaccines, so that is the Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca, they're using the adenovirus. Now, the adenovirus must be replication incompetent. To make it incompetent, they had to delete an E1 protein. Don't ask me about too much details. And because of this, you have to have very specialized cell lines to grow those adenoviruses. And indeed, they use a cell line that was derived from an elective abortion that took place in the 1970s or 80s, where they took the retinoblast cell and then made a cell line. Now, a cell line, fetal cell lines are cells that then grow in laboratories. Basically, they descend from that and then they're multiplied. So by now, it's almost 1,000 times away from that original cell. And so it's really removed. So the answer is, for the culturing, for the development of the vaccine, they did use fetal cell lines, but there's no fetal cell or fetal tissue in any of the vaccines. The vaccines are actually very clean and very pure vaccines using very good technology. The mRNA vaccine, as I showed, has nothing to do with it at all. It is just mRNA, is just the mRNA and the lipid nanoparticle, all this cholesterol stuff.
Thanks very much. A lot of people are being concerned, a question from Catherine Welsh here, about the number of physicians, scientists, and people who should know expressing concerns about the vaccines. And of course, people without any scientific or medical background, when they see a group of doctors or scientists coming together behind a certain theory, why do you think this is?
It is a combination of a lot of factors. Maybe I'll pull you away to the hydroxychloroquine thing. Many doctors came behind the idea that hydroxychloroquine works, but it became an incredibly politicized issue. And I think then other scientists and doctors jumped on it because they thought they have some political gain. Hydroxychloroquine does not work. There are more than 100 studies that show it. It's over, it's out. Ivermectin does not work. Now, unfortunately, with the vaccines, the half-educated are sometimes worse than the non-educated. Mm-hmm. And they jump on issues maybe also because of a political gain or of some backgrounds. But I must say, it saddens me, and it saddens me especially if it comes from Christians. We have to spend time, not just looking at WhatsApp messages and YouTubes. You have to do due diligence. Look up your data, study the data, and be well informed. That's our duty to the world, I think.
We still hear people saying that the safety profile is still largely unknown for the vaccines, and that they're not properly licensed, they're being authorized under emergency use. How do we respond to that?
So I totally agree with you. When the initial emergency use authorization came out, it was based on very well done efficacy trials and safety trials, but they were done. The observation time was short, and the numbers were around 30,000. But today, now that we've given 2 billion doses, nobody can say we have no data. We have good data, and the vaccines are safe. We do have safety issues. So, for example, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine does have a safety issue with these, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome. So I'm not denying it. And so therefore, it's a very nuanced approach of benefit versus risk. And whatever you look at, the benefit far outweighs the risk. Now, for the mRNA vaccines, we have incredibly good data. I mean, millions of people with good data. And for the mRNA vaccine, the issue is the anaphylaxis that occurs in 5 out of 1 million vaccinees.
We hear a lot of people saying that we don't know yet because it hasn't been run long enough. Now, even if you say 2.5 billion people have had this, and the only serious things we know about are anaphylaxis and clotting, as you've described. But is it possible that there might be other long-term effects from vaccine that will not show up till months later? And this is one anxiety that people have expressed.
So if you understand the way how these vaccines work, then you should be relieved. I mean, the whole idea is, there are delivery systems to deliver the spike protein so that at an amount that it doesn't cause illness, so low enough not to cause illness, high enough to mount an immune response. Once you have the immune response, that spike protein is gone. Your mRNA is already gone within hours, right? So once you're over your 48 hours of all these reactogenicity, then there's nothing more to be expected. Basically, there are no vaccines, and vaccines where they thought it would cause autoimmune disease, autism, all these others, they all prove to be also wrong, right? So vaccines are really, most of the side effects do occur within the first 4 weeks, and we now have enough data on the first 4 weeks. There's only one vaccine, and that's the dengue vaccine, where we saw the problem about 2 or 3 years afterwards. But the mechanism of the dengue vaccine was already anticipated because it reflects what's happening in nature, and was based on the interaction of 4 distinct dengue serotypes. So it's different. But I think it's a dengue vaccine fear that some people now have that also that they think apply to this vaccine. I personally, we have, so the risk of anything coming out now, we now have observation times of 6 months, right? We have, and we haven't seen any problem. So I would think the risk that we would see anything later is very extremely negligibly low. That doesn't mean that we don't need to follow up. We need to follow up, but it's scientifically very low.
An issue that's come up in some cultures and in some Christian cultures as well is accepting the vaccine some kind of denial of God's power to heal? Are we looking to human solutions rather than godly solutions? I'm sure you've got a very good response to that one.
I have 3 thoughts about this. The first is, do you as a Christian doctor with someone with appendicitis and say, well, just start and don't go for your appendicectomy? I have a friend who has hypertension at the age of 40. Do we tell her, well, you don't need to take antihypertensives because I'm sure you will not get a stroke in 20 years' time? So we need to apply the same principles that we use for other diseases also for COVID. But I think the second aspect I would like to highlight here, with this notion that you will be protected against this disease, COVID, does not translate into reality. We don't see the non-Christians not having COVID and the Christians or the other way around, that Christians are protected against COVID and non-Christians are getting COVID. The reality is that even more Christians getting COVID than non-Christians. I was there during the SARS outbreak in Singapore. The first to die was a pastor who had the compassion to come in and pray, unfortunately got infected and died. Where often the Christians and there are good stories, who came forward to serve in these kind of hospital settings and then died as a consequence. I just want to highlight you may all not know, but the Italian outbreak, this big epicenter in Italy, was because of a Catholic gathering of thousands of older priests and Catholics, and that's why. And they were so basically. All the Catholics then died. In fact, it was then the Catholics who the priest that even said, I will die so a younger person will get the ventilator. So there are lots of issues. And the last issue, I think, the last response to that question is Jesus himself. Jesus was tempted in the desert, and he said, and the devil tested him and said, well, just jump down, jump down, or be exposed to COVID, we are, and you will get, and you will be saved. But Jesus said, do not tempt the Lord.
Thank you. There's a question here. How do we respond to Christian friends or non-Christian friends who've picked up things on social media and don't seem to be open to any of the scientific arguments that you've been giving us today?
I wish I had the answer. I am suffering as you all do. I receive these from lots of friends, and I guess I'm an easy target. because they also think that WHO is satanic. So I receive this often. There is a certain psychopathology to this, and I can tell you just with scientific facts, it doesn't work. So my advice is ignore, be quiet, or give, or maybe come back with questions rather than answers where you say, but have you thought about this? Did you check on this? I think that's the way to do it. I also don't have, if you have the answer, please tell me. It's part of my daily suffering.
Well, we know as Christians that there are a lot of true things that people have all sorts of reasons for not believing, don't we? There are a couple of questions here about antibody-dependent enhancement, and this relating to the idea of cells churning out more and more and more spike protein over a long period of time, and what that might do to the immune system. Can you comment on that?
Yes, so the notion of antibody-dependent enhancement was discussed very early on, and lots of consensus meetings took place because we've seen it with an RSV vaccine, an inactivated measles vaccine in the 60s, and the most recent example is the dengue vaccine. So there were concerns, and then the consensus was that vaccine development should be a vaccine that is that in immunological terms has both a Th1 and a Th2 component. So it's not only a humoral, not only an antibody, but it would also trigger T cells, because we then know that the risk of antibody-dependent enhancement is much lower. Fortunately for us, all the vaccines developed have a very strong T cellular and humoral component. So that's one answer. The second is, to answer the question, first of all, we now have a long time of observation, more than 1 year of experience with a natural disease, and we haven't seen the problem of antibody-dependent enhancement. But we have also, I think the best answer to address, the best way of addressing this question is with animal studies. So the idea that waning or lower antibodies that are not fully neutralizing could enhance the disease needs to be addressed in animal studies, and all the animal studies show that it doesn't happen in animals. It has not been shown. Even if you, so latest studies were, introducing very low volumes of antibodies to recapitulate the idea of ADE, and it was not seen in animals. So yes, we're monitoring this, but currently it's very reassuring. It has not been observed.
Some suggestions of websites. Are there any websites that you would point people to as a one-stop shop for dealing with vaccine hesitancy issues? We will flag these up when we write to people as well. But just off the top of your head, any that you would particularly flag?
Yes, actually, WHO has various links. I can, in fact, maybe I'll add that into one of the slides, and then so you can share it. So there are several links from programmatic point of view, from content point of view, understanding how vaccine hesitancy works and what can be done programmatically. I personally think a year ago I was, when I shared some of the QAnon strange things, people were still laughing, because we thought it's not true. Well, 30% in America now, are somehow introduced by QAnon thinking. I think we all should go back and really study what are their tactics, what is their hidden agenda, what do they really want with these QAnon ideas, and so that once you see it, that you can recognize the pattern and react against it.
There's a question here that relates to the US. So the US has the highest supply of vaccine, but is not among the countries with the highest rate of acceptance. Why is this? Is this because of conspiracy theories like QAnon, or is it because a strong sense of personal freedom, liberal values, not wanting to be told what to do? Any thoughts on that? Why America's out of step?
Well, yes, it is it is not that bad. If the vaccine acceptance has increased in the US, even amongst the Republicans, even amongst anti-vaxxers. So I think, and the coverage rates in the US are, world leading coverage rates. So we are still looking up to what's happening in the US, and we here in Europe are far behind, right? But that's more than vaccine hesitancy, of course. I think in the US, indeed, it's a whole mixed bag, from politicization this virus, saying it's a hoax, saying the hydroxychloroquine works. It's, it was mixed in a Republican extremism, and they could not separate it. And strangely enough, and the Americans have to explain that to me, because Trump himself is a supporter of the vaccine, and really, and I was part of that, really pushed a lot of money into vaccine development, and he knows that vaccines is the only way out of this. So I hope that we can, we have to understand this whole baggage, but I do think we are underestimating QAnon, and I do think that I am more afraid of QAnon than I am of this pandemic. The pandemic, we'll get over it. But QAnon could fester on, and I'm more worried about this. This is, to me, yeah, that's my main concern.
Oh, fascinating. Now, people who've had the COVID illness already and have proven antigen or antibody responses, do they still need to get vaccinated? This is a question that we often hear. And why? Yeah, why not?
It's an important question, because we have now, what did I say, 170 million cases. So you could save 170 million doses by, and the problem is a programmatic problem. You want a vaccination that goes out, programmatically easily. So you don't want to ask and do blood taking and screen, etc., and ask. So for programmatic ease, it's better to just vaccinate everyone. What I tell people, if you know that you had a PCR confirmation disease, delay your vaccination and get vaccinated maybe 6 months later. So we at WHO recommend that such persons can consider delaying it for 6 months. The current evidence from the natural cohort studies, so where you observe, people over time, look very good. So natural infection does protect you for definitely longer than 9 months. So it does look good. That said, in a study from South Africa, they saw where there were covariants that the protection of natural previous infection was lower. And therefore, the vaccination will trigger a higher antibody response. So we do think there's an additional benefit of vaccination.
Do people need to isolate? If they've been vaccinated already, do they need to isolate after positive contact? I know that's a controversial question with lots of different political approaches, but from a scientific point of view, what's the risk?
So we have now increasing body of evidence that vaccines do reduce transmission. They do reduce viral shedding, duration of shedding, transmission, asymptomatic infection. They're all reduced by vaccines. But WHO has to give a global recommendation, and different vaccines have a different impact on asymptomatic infections. This, combined with the fact that coverage rates are still low in most parts of the world, makes us still say that you should continue all the public health and social measures. In countries like the US, where you now do have good coverage rates, and in Israel, they have stopped. They don't do quarantine. No, they don't have, they don't do face masks, etc. So yes, when you have good coverage rates, that's why there is hope. This pandemic will come to an end. There is a way out. Israel, and that's, I think, important to the Christians, Israel has shown a way out of this pandemic. We need to follow.
Do we need vaccine passports going forward?
This is, countries have already decided, right? Europe will go for passports. I'm representing WHO here, and the thinking there is that for reasons of equity, we cannot have immune passports this moment, because it's not a fault of an individual not to be vaccinated if they have no access, right? Until we have good access and good global vaccine coverage rates, maybe then we can discuss, these passports. But nevertheless, this week our WHO said, because a lot of countries, including Europe, is going ahead with these immune passports for various reasons, and so.
It'll be decisions made by nation states, I guess.
Yes.
Could you just comment? I know it's not directly related, but while we've got you here, just tell us your thoughts on the inequity there is at the moment. The huge need, especially in some developing countries, for vaccination, and what you would do in terms of bolstering COVAX or other means of getting it there. What do you think the answer is, and what kind of policy should countries in the West that have good vaccination rates be adopting with regard to their excess or even their capacity to produce a lot more vaccine that they don't need themselves?
So inequitable distribution must be addressed, and it's very stark. It is COVAX has now received more vaccines, and I must also thank the US. There is now, and also the G7. There was just an announcement over the last weekend or the last few days that they will donate 1 billion doses. So I think there are solutions coming. It's not only about political will and money here. It is also about the sheer, it's the scalability of manufacturing, but also rolling out vaccines to remote populations, the programmatic issues. So it is very, very complex. I do think that countries that have achieved a reasonable coverage rates, definitely for those above the age of 30, should consider donating their vaccines to countries that have not, and it is happening. There is a breath of fresh hope, but it's taking its time, and we will not see the end of this pandemic by the end of this year. It will continue until next year, but I think the acute phase. The acute phase means being overwhelmed, all that, the severe pandemic response restrictions, that will be over by the end of this year.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you just finally how you see things going from this stage on, as much as it's possible to predict. We've had these 4 variants which are more easily transmissible and seem to be taking over in new countries. Do you see this is going to go on and on with more variants? Do you think there's a danger of more virulent variants that are going to kill more people? Or are you really feeling quite optimistic now in terms of where we're at globally? Can you see an end to this?
So the variants are indeed a spammer in the whole game. But reassuringly, we were so concerned about them, but reassuringly, the vaccine effectiveness studies that are coming out, they do show a reduced effectiveness against the variants, but it's not markedly reduced. And in fact, protection against severe disease and death remains quite high against variants that we currently have. We cannot predict which other variants will come and whether they will become more virulent. We should pray. We should pray. In fact, the answer to this whole problem is, if we get a variant that is highly transmissible but does not cause death, that's what we want, and then everyone becomes immune and doesn't cause death. That's what we want, but we don't have it in the moment. But the 4 variants are of concern, but reassuringly, they are not. The current vaccines, we can reassure people, the current vaccines still have a major impact also in areas with these variants of concerns.
Okay, well, we've got lots more questions, but we've really run out of time now. But thank you to everyone for the questions that you've put in. We're hugely indebted to you, Annelies, again. Thank you for coming back. We hope we'll have you again in the future at some time, but you've really given a wonderful talk and great answers to the questions. Of course, impossible that we could answer everything that people might want to ask in such a limited time, but amazing the amount of things that you've managed to pack in. And so it just remains to me again to say thank you again, Professor Wilder-Smith. Thank you to all of you who've come to listen, put in your questions. So God bless you, and we hope we'll see you again at ICMDA webinars in the near future. Thank you.